Hi friends, my name is Angela and welcome to my YouTube channel. I am going to share with you the books that I read in July 2025 today. Every month I do a wrap up of all of the books that I've read in one succinct post, and I hope you enjoy this today. It has been a mixed bag as usual. I have had some big books in size, as well as the topics within the books have been very interesting, and I'm looking forward to sharing them with you all. And the other thing that is probably happened by the time you watch this video is the Booker dozen should have been released, and I am very interested to see who is on this list. I don't usually read lists, like prize lists in the approach to the award, but I am very interested to see if any of the books that I have organically read make it onto the list. So that's coming out, and it's probably out by the time you are seeing this video. So I look forward to sharing my thoughts with you in the next video. Okay, so let's get into what I read in July. The first book that I read for the month, which many of you will know about because you joined me in reading this in my very first read along, is Burial Rites by Hannah Kent. I don't have my copy with me anymore because I had to give it to my mum as soon as I finished reading it. And it was an incredible story. I think most people that read this book experienced a 5-star read with this book. We actually had 33 people join us on this read along on Storygraph, and thank you so much for joining in. It was so fun to be able to read the book and then jump in and talk about the moments that were really interesting, really had caught our attention, and start to speculate a bit about what was going to happen next. So thank you so much to all those people that joined in the read along. It was such a fun experience. Okay, so Burial Rites is the debut novel from Hannah Kent, and it was published in 2013. And it is the story of a woman named Agnes Magnusdottir who has been tried and found guilty of murdering her former master. And it's inspired by the story and the legend of the last woman who was publicly executed in Iceland in 1829. So in Burial Rites, Agnes has been found guilty of this murder, and in the lead up to her execution, she is sent to live with a family and board with them and provide physical labour over the summer through until the time that she's going to be executed. So the book is from two main perspectives, and the first is from Agnes's perspective, which is some of the most haunting, beautiful prose I've ever read. And the other perspective is from a man named Toti, who is a priest that Agnes has specifically requested to be her spiritual guardian as she comes towards the end of her life. The family she's staying with, which are the Johnsons, have their opinions that she is clearly a horrible woman, a witch of a woman, and they don't want anything to do with her, and they want to just exclude her from everything, just get through these months that they have to. But as Toti and the Johnsons spend more time with Agnes, they realise that there is more to her story than what they've been told. The gossip and the sensationalised stories about Agnes are not playing out as they would expect in when they get to know her. There are a number of themes in this book, and one of them is most definitely about power and gender and the inequality that we see playing out in these households. It really illustrates well the limited power that women have in these patriarchal kind of societies, and it raises questions about justice and truth and the fairness of the Icelandic justice system at the time. And it also discusses identity and our perception of other people's identities. This book was it was a revelation. It was one of the most enjoyable reads I have had. It was so immersive and so atmospheric. I held on to this book because I thought this would be a great winter read. Being in Iceland, I thought it was going to be major Iceland winter vibes. It actually starts in high summer. So if you're someone who is waiting to read this for, to be led by your mood, high summer is when it actually starts in the book, and then it ends in January, so in midwinter. The story is very quiet and it feels gentle the way it is presented to you, but the atmosphere that Hannah Kent has created is riveting. The characters just jump off the page, and Hannah Kent's writing is so amazing. I think I will continue to just spruik her, and I will continue to shout about her talents from the hills, because the metaphors and similes she used, the pacing, the inner dialogue of Agnes, the vividness of Iceland as it's the country, the landscapes. I really enjoyed spending my time with Agnes. It was an interesting story because she knows that she is going to die, and you know that's going to happen because you know that the story is based on the last woman who has been executed in Iceland. So that was an interesting dynamic to try and stay with her and be hopeful in some way. But there were moments towards the end of the book, some of the moments as she was coming to the end were just absolutely heart-wrenching, as you saw the people around her that had started to get to know her and maybe think maybe she wasn't responsible for these horrible murders. They were some truly heartbreaking moments, and I think a lot of us towards the end most definitely were either crying or on the brink of crying with this book. Hannah Kent dedicated years of research to this story, and I know this because after I finished Burial Rites, I started Hannah Kent's memoir, Always Home, Always Homesick, which was just released this year. I was 2 chapters into Burial Rites when I went out and bought this book because Hannah Kent's writing was absolutely magical. There's 2 particular parts to this book. The first part is a reflection of Hannah Kent's time in Iceland as a 17-year-old exchange student. The second part of the book focuses on her time researching and creating the book Burial Rites. So at 17, Hannah Kent has never seen snow, doesn't speak a word of Icelandic, and really has no idea what to expect when she signed up to do this year-long exchange program in Iceland. All she knew was that she wanted to soak up something from the world and start to maybe find out who she was and what she could offer. Iceland is so far removed from Australia in so many ways, not just geographically, but the landscape, the cultures. There were so many elements that would have been incredibly foreign to her. And when she arrived in Iceland, into a remote part of Iceland in a dark winter, she really was thrown into the deep end. Her descriptions in those early months of her exchange are really raw, and you can see her aching for home, her disorientation of this not only a unique landscape and culture, but the language was also this real wall that kept her from connecting with people properly, and you can really feel that jumping off the page. I personally related to this part of the book really well because I did an exchange program when I was about 15. I only went for a month. I went into a country that speaks French, and I remember those feelings, and a lot of what she wrote I really did resonate with. Those feelings of having to fit into a family even though you really don't speak the language that well. You've come from a different culture. And if you are an introvert, it is very difficult because you have to put yourself out there and you have to try. You can't just hide yourself in a room for all these months that you're going to be on exchange. And it was really endearing to see Hannah just see these opportunities come up and go, okay, all right, I need to do this. And she had to fit in. And as hard as it was at first, Hannah Kent fell in love with Iceland. She fell in love with the landscape and with the people. And it was there, amidst all of this, that she had that seed planted that perhaps she was a writer. When she returned home to Australia, Hannah found it very difficult to escape this story she had heard about of a woman named Agnes, Magnus' daughter, who had been executed in Iceland. And it was just not a myth, but it was like a legend. Everyone kind of knew little pieces about it that she spoke to in Iceland. I think people might say that you find a story, but I think Hannah Kent would say this story found her. It just continued to haunt her until she felt like she had to tell this story. And this turned into Burial Rites, which became a phenomenon in Australia, across the world, and also in Iceland, and almost made her an honorary Icelandic. The second half of the memoir is fascinating for anyone who is a bibliophile to really understand why she made the decisions she did. For instance, she had this third-person narrative which was from Toti or from the Johnson family, but then she had a first-person narrative which was Agnes's inner dialogue. And at first, a lot of people that were doing the read-along said that they struggled with that for the first few chapters to try and to adjust to that flipping between 2 different narratives. And Hannah Kent explains why she chose to do that in here. So that was really interesting. And the way she explains her creative decisions in blending history with truth, or trying to find, like she would have to create a backstory as much as she could for Agnes with limited information. And then when she went on later to find the information that she kind of made up, it was kind of interesting for her to see the strings that connected the two. And something else I really loved was how Kent realized that Iceland is a nation of storytellers, and they value literature above a lot of other things, especially in consideration with Australia. The amount of money the Australian government puts into sport is insane, but then the amount of money they put into literature programs is just a drop in the ocean. And comparing that to Iceland, it was clear that they as a nation value storytelling a lot. And it's something that she has absorbed as part of herself, and it's a reason why she keeps returning. And the title is about her finding two different homes, and so always feeling that homesickness for one place, whether she's in Iceland feeling homesick for Australia or Australia wanting to be in Iceland. I thought it was a beautiful book. It's a memoir that I think has set a real gold standard for memoirs for me. So beautifully written. This book really does capture her being a daughter of Australia and Iceland, and how she made a family there. Her host families became as close as any biological family. She's attended weddings and they attended her wedding, and it's really quite beautiful. In terms of ratings, I think I would give both books probably a 4.5 star. Agnes's dialogue, her inner dialogue, her first person dialogue, her narrative was very lyrical and very poetic, and the third person narrative was much more realistic. You know, there was conversations and banter and dialogue. There were times when Agnes was talking to the family, and I felt like she was talking in a way that was more of her inner dialogue prose, and it wouldn't be how you would speak to someone, and that kind of just drew me out of the story. And then for her memoir, I think the only reason it's not a 5-star read is that there were a number of chapters at the end where we were being led towards this conflict as Hannah was starting to come to a point where she was going to be meeting with an academic who had other opinions about Agnes. There was a number of chapters that brought us up to that moment, and then we got to it and it just kind of fizzled out. So that was probably the only reason I wouldn't give it a 5-star. But I'm being very critical. These are both beautiful books. I will recommend them to anybody. I'm probably being too critical in all honesty. They probably do come up against my 5-star criteria, to be honest. But I'm hesitant to give a rating. I really am hesitant, and that's just something that's my problem. If you are a book lover, if you love historical fiction, go and read both Burial Rites and Hannah Kent's memoir. They are truly beautifully written. My next book was very different. After I read The Young and the Dam and the Fair by Gareth Russell about Catherine Howard, who was Henry VIII's fourth wife, I started watching The Tudors. I thought, I'm just going to watch The Tudors. I love that show. I love how it's produced and the characters and the actors. But I was watching it and I'm like, this is so historically inaccurate. So I decided to pick up Hunting the Falcon, Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn and the Marriage That Shook Europe by John Guy and Julia Fox, who I believe are a married couple. This book was released in 2023, and when I bought it, I didn't realize it was quite so big. It's very big, but it has 3 appendices. It's very comprehensive. I was looking for a definitive account of the story of Henry and Anne and what their marriage meant, what it meant to be breaking with the Catholic Church from Rome, what it meant for the people of England. I really don't think we realise the magnitude of this today. Like it's become a little bit normalised, I think, where you've got the one thing where he broke with the Catholic Church, but then for Henry VIII to kill 2 queen consorts was unheard of up until that point and has never happened again. It is not normal for him to have decided to execute 2 of his consorts. I think we think that this was normal for this time in history, but it was not normal. That was outrageous. And I think this book really helped me understand that the lengths he went to secure a living male heir were extreme, even by Tudor England standards. Even now, I'm like getting closer and closer. Like, this is something that is truly a fascination to me. Even the political propaganda that King Henry VIII engaged in to get everybody in England on his side, on the side of his marriage to Anne Boleyn, was incredible. This book really reads as a great narrative which kept me engaged. It was not like a dull, dry history book. I really was engaged throughout the entire book and I did not want to put it down. In particular, I liked that it was almost a behavioural and character study of both Henry and Anne, and it gave information from their childhood, their upbringing, family history, and the political and social landscape in England and France and in Europe at this time, shaped them into the Henry and Anne that we know of today. And having this bigger context is really valuable. I particularly enjoyed reading about Henry and Anne's formative years, Anne growing up and then going to the French court, and Henry growing up in the knowledge that his brother Arthur is going to be king and he doesn't need to be concerned about that. So he was able to be a little bit more of a mummy's boy, and that kind of turned him into this narcissist that we know of today. It is beautifully written, a really great narrative, thoroughly well researched. It might lean a bit too much on the letters from Eustace Chapuis, who was an ambassador to Spain, so they might be a little bit biased, and it did lean a lot on those. but it has led me to want to read a few more of John Guy's books about Mary Queen of Scots and Queen Elizabeth I. Then I went on to read The Names by Florence Knapp. This was a new release I was really eager to read. Everyone that I respect in the Bookstagram YouTube world really had enjoyed this book. They found it to be like a 5-star read for them, so I was very excited to read this one. It's a debut novel and it's set in 1987 initially, where a woman named Cora is off to the registry office with her newborn son and her 9-year-old daughter, and they are going to register the name of her son. Cora encounters this sliding doors moment that changes the course of all of their lives, because she believes the name she gives her son will really influence his life overall, or be indicative of the life he's going to have. Her husband's name is Gordon, and he expects his son's name to be Gordon as well, just as his father's name was, and so on and so on. That's what he expects. However, Gordon, Cora's husband, despite being this pillar in the community as a doctor, is subjecting Cora to quite horrific psychological and physical abuse behind closed doors. And she can't bear to name her son after her abusive husband because she wants to break that cycle. She wants to give him something hopeful. So she's faced with a decision as she gets to the registry office. Does she call her son Bear, which is her daughter Maya's favourite name for the baby? Does she call him Gordon, which is what his father wants? Or does she call him Julian, which is what her preferred name for him is? After this, we're presented with 3 different timelines, and each different chapter is Cora's son having been given a different name: Bear, Julian, or Gordon, and how his life and those around him, how their lives changed depending on his name. However, I feel like the synopsis of this book is not what this book is about. It is not about how your name can change the course of your life. This is a story about abuse and how that abuse can change the course, not just of the people in the immediate vicinity of the abuse, the abuser and the victim, but their family, their wider family, children, grandparents, friends, how it can affect everybody, and it can create a generational trauma. The portrayal of domestic violence in this book was very confronting for me. As I read the first few chapters, I could feel a buzzing over my body. I could feel anxiety building. And this is just the first couple of chapters. So I thought that I thought maybe this is a DNF for me. Maybe this subject is just too much. And I didn't expect it going in. I doubt I would have picked this book up if I had known it was centered around domestic violence so much, if I knew that it was quite as graphic as it was. Yes, the writing is beautiful. Yes, I probably will pick up something else of Florence Knapp's in the future if I know what if it's not a similar kind of topic. But I just feel that I was marketed one book and I got a different book, which was a problem for me. So I don't know. It's hard to rate this one because I have that in my mind that I expected one thing and I got another. So it's hard for me to rate it, but I would just caution you going into it if you haven't read it yet. Just be aware that there is some very graphic domestic violence in here. Okay, so I felt like I needed something light after that, so I read something about World War I. Not really. I've been reading this one from when I was in Japan. I started reading it back in March, so this has been on the go for a while and I wanted to wait until winter again. This is The Winter Soldier by Daniel Mason. Daniel Mason, I fell in love with his writing when I first read North Woods last year. It was one of my top books of the year in 2024. Phenomenal. So I wanted to pick up something else of his, and I've got 2 books on my shelf and this is one of them. So The Winter Soldier is set in World War I in Vienna, and we follow Lucius, who is a 22-year-old medical student from a wealthy family. When the war breaks out, Lucius is given the opportunity to fast-track his graduation if he enlists in the military. So he decides to enlist, which is something that he feels might make his parents happier because they are not big fans of him being a doctor. And he is sent to this isolated makeshift hospital in the mountains. When he gets there, it's pretty grim. Lucius has barely touched a patient, let alone treated patients that are coming from the front lines of war. He finds that there's been a typhus outbreak, the medical supplies are non-existent, and all of the other doctors have fled. The only person left is a nurse who ends up teaching Lucius and helping him learn how to amputate limbs and treat these soldiers. He learns about medicine and reality the hard way, and he and this nurse form they form a friendship out of this. Then one day, a half-dead soldier is brought in from the snow, and Lucius ends up making a decision that will affect both of their lives. What is really interesting is that the author is both a physician and a psychiatrist. So the medical information in here, the historical medical references are really well researched, and I found it quite fascinating. I have an analytical mind in that way where I want to know those specifics. I find them interesting. But it also describes another disease that is born out of war, which is post-traumatic stress, and how the medical community are just trying to understand this sickness of the mind and understand why it has happened and how they can fix it. So a lot of it is on the go medical treatment. Overall, it's a really beautiful book about love, second chances, about the long-term effects of the decisions we make. It's a character-driven novel that you will lose yourself in this world. It is so well drawn. Daniel Mason's writing is beautiful. I'm really glad that there were also elements of nature writing in here, which were some of my favorite moments from North Woods. He really does write about the natural world so beautifully. And then in a very random end to my month, I picked up The Crimson Moth by Kristen Ciccarelli, and this is published as the Heartless Hunter in the States, but it is part of what is called the Crimson Moth duology. After a few heavy subjects this month, I wanted something light, something a bit of a palate cleanser between these heavy subjects I had been reading, and I happened to see this book on like a specials counter, and so I thought I'd grab it. It is an enemies to lover romance, fantasy, and it is about Rune, who is a witch, and Gideon, who is a witch hunter. And the book switches from both of their perspectives throughout. Now, the world building in this fantasy is not complex. I think this is probably more of a romantic fantasy as opposed to a fantasy romance. So we are on an island that is known as the New Republic. When we start this book, we find that 2 years earlier, there has been a purge of all of the witches in this area. And you can really only call it a genocide. They're like, if you're a witch, you're dead. There's no maybe ifs, are you good, are you bad? This came about because a bunch of non-witchy people said they were being oppressed by witches, and they were like, we need to get on top of this, and we're going to kill everybody. So in the current day, we meet Rune, who is living two different lives. On the surface, she is the darling of the New Republic. She is an informer of witches, and she actually turned in her grandmother, who was subsequently killed. And now she spends her days socializing, gossiping, attending balls like a good socialite. However, this is only the surface, because a couple of months after her grandmother, her adopted grandmother, died, she found that she was a witch. And so now she is navigating that knowledge without any training. And since that point, she's made it her mission to atone for the mistakes she made in terms of turning in her grandmother by being a vigilante witch, by finding the witches that are being taken away and about to be purged, and finding a way to release them and get them off the island. She's known as the Crimson Moth, and while no one knows her identity, she is public enemy number one for the Blood Guard, which are the military people who are on the mission to find and execute all the witches. There's one particular witch who is captured at the start of this book, which is someone that Rune's been looking for the 2 years since the initial purge. And she is captured by the Blood Guard. And so Rune really needs to find where she is. So she decides that she is going to cozy up to some people in the know and find out the inside information, to the extent that she will court or possibly marry someone if it will give her that inside knowledge. She decides to ensnare a man named Gideon Sharp, who is this big brooding brother of her best friend, but he is also a key element in the Blood Guard, and he most definitely would know where this witch is being held. So Gideon is notorious and unrelenting in his journey to find and kill all the witches, and at first he is kind of just, I'm not interested in Rune, she's just a gossip and a socialite, but then he realizes a connection between the Crimson Moth and Rune, and that either she is the Crimson Moth or she knows who the Crimson Moth is. So he decides that he is going to pretend to like her, to get to know her and find out more, while she is doing the same to him. So they're both pretending to like each other to get the information. So these two fools start to pretend to like each other, and then they start to realize that the fronts they're putting out into the world maybe aren't exactly who they are deep down, and they start to fall for each other in reality. At first I thought it sounded like fun, right? And the whole idea of a witch and a witch hunter, I'm like, I graduated from the school of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, so I love that. I really do love that if it's done well, but unfortunately this fell flat. Firstly, it's set in like 18th or 19th century vibes with carriages and horses and balls and opera gloves. And then there was a scene where Rune is out riding her horse doing something, and she comes home and she puts on her favorite comfy hoodie. And I was like, okay. The romance scenes were well written. The banter between Gideon and Rune was really good. And you could see how their faux desire for each other kind of went away as real emotions came in. However, the enemies to lovers theme was not as balanced as I think it needs to be to work. You know, like think about Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy. These guys hate each other, but they don't want each other dead. But then you've got Buffy and Angel, and for lack of a better example, at the moments when they were enemies, they wanted to kill each other equally. So there's a balance. The way that they despise each other is the same. Gideon is a witch hunter. His goal is to kill all the witches. And that means if he finds out that Rune is a witch, he will want to kill her, no questions asked. He's contributed to the genocide of all of these witches that have come before Rune. But Rune, who is a really cool vigilante. I really liked her story, the way that she was, rescuing witches. She doesn't hate Gideon with the same amount of venom, which is interesting because he has killed all of these people that are her people. And the thing with Gideon is that he believes all witches are evil because of his singular experience with one witch. The past of his is being used as a momentum for him to continue to hunt these witches. I really liked Rune and the Crimson Moth concept, and I wish there was more of her actually rescuing witches in here. There was just her telling us about it. And I could continue to talk about the things that I didn't like, but that was the main thing, was that the enemies to lovers trope was not equal. I didn't understand why Rune would fall in love with this guy who is going to kill her and he wouldn't think twice about it. It just didn't make sense to me. If he'd been a little bit more malleable and maybe he had a bone in his body that maybe would help him to be a little remorseful for what he was doing, maybe. But I also don't think that I don't get this because it's marketed as young adult, but there are some themes in here and scenes and things that happen that I do not think a young adult audience should be reading. So it's more like a new adult fiction. But even so, young adults and new adults deserve good books, good plots, good characters, good character development, and this just didn't do it. I finished this book not as a hate read. I wanted to see where it was going to go, and I kind of saw the twists before they came, which was a bit disappointing. It was one of those predictable things for me, but I wanted to read it because there's a booktuber that I follow and they had talked about it quite a bit, and I trust their opinion. Although this is probably the second or third book that they've recommended that I've tried, and it's just not worked for me. So I think it's a lesson for me that particular booktuber, as much as I love hearing them talk about books and the way they talk about them, their recommendations are not for me. They're not good. Their reading choices are very different to mine, and they are looking for something very, very different. I need a little bit more meat with my plots. I'm not a critical reader, but I need a little bit more than this. So those were the books that I read in July. It was a good mixed bag. It was good. I'm glad I read some of these books. Like I said, I'm not a super critical thinker in reading, or I don't think I am. I'm not looking at it from like a English literature study perspective, but I like a good story and I like to feel something when I read a book, and unfortunately the Crimson Moth missed it for me and I felt a little bit cheated by the names. So if I was to pick a book that was my favourite, it'd be hard to, like a fiction book for sure, it would be Burial Rites. If I was to have to choose like a non-fiction favourite, it would probably be Always Home, Always Homesick, but I did love the book about the Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. That was a fantastic read. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. I hope this has not been too long as I prattle about these books. Thank you especially to those people that joined the read along. I am so grateful for you guys, and I will have a think about another book. I don't know if I'll be able to get another banger like Burial Rites, but we'll give it a go. So please keep an eye out and I'll share that read along when it happens, probably in a few months' time. But thank you so much for joining me. Keep your eye out for the Booker Prize, which is being released if it hasn't already, and I'll hopefully share my thoughts on that in the next video. And thank you so much for your love on my most recent one when I shared my TBR bookshelf reprioritizing. That was a lot of fun and you guys enjoyed it, so I will most definitely bring you along the journey when I do my other bookshelf. Have a wonderful week of reading ahead of you and I will speak with you soon. Bye.